We have the vice chair. Yeah, you're in public.
Earlier today, I had problems with my mic. Can people hear me?
I can hear you.
Great, thanks.
Get a motion. Sheridan, and John, you've been all set. Okay. We have a quorum, Deb? Mike, call the meeting to order. We have the minutes. Everyone have a chance to review the minutes? Any corrections to the minutes? I'll move it. Second? Accept the minutes? Do I have a second to accept the minutes? Thank you, Dana Hogan. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? It's passed. Next up, department reports, alternative sentencing, Mike Gray.
Yes, good afternoon, everyone. I just want to provide a couple brief updates. Our juvenile work program, the crews have been out in our county garden as well as cleaning up the hot spots on along the Baden Kill, and then moving into the Ford Inn Park along the canal, doing some cleaning and staining of picnic tables. Our adult community service program has been busy mowing as the Murray Street Park, Martindale Avenue Park, as well as the cemeteries. There's 3 cemeteries they maintain. And they also, with the recent flooding in Whitehall, went up and helped 2 seniors out by cleaning out their basements that were flooded. So they've been pretty busy. I just want to update you a little bit on some of the classes that we hold traditionally in person, but our DWI, DUI program is meeting via Zoom. Thinking for a Change, which is a criminal thinking class, is also meeting Zoom. And then on 9/15 will be the first time that we hold Alive at 25 and distracted driving via Zoom. And our last time we held that class was March, pre-COVID. So we have a backlog of about 20 folks just to take that program. And the last thing I have is I invited Carrie Wright from the Office of Community Services to address the magistrates on 9/22 about go over some of the services that the Office of Community Services is able to provide to the courts, as well as going over the criteria for Article 730 as well, exam and 390/30 exams. So that's about it for my update. And if there are any questions, glad to answer them.
Any questions for Mike? Thank you, Mike.
Thank you.
Chris, are you gonna handle it for assigned counsel?
I need a few more minutes. I'm waiting for some information, so I should be with you shortly if you want to go to whoever's next.
Move on, Tony? You're muted, Tony.
our first item, we had unfortunately, in large part due to the demands of her family, a single mom who was one of our, just a great employee, but had to leave with all of the uncertainty coming this fall. So we need to backfill her position, which is a legal assistant position. What we're hoping to do, and we're working on it right now to see if it will be the right fit. We're hoping to promote from within. We have a clerk right now who shows all of the appropriate interest and motivation, and we're just sort of trying to measure the aptitude at this point, whether she can do it. But if that works out, then we would look to move her into the legal assistant position, which would then leave us with needing to backfill the clerk position, which is a lower grade position.
I'll move those back to the personnel. I'll second.
Second. Discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Okay.
Thank you.
Anything else? Go ahead.
As far as the office goes, we are well into, I think, our 6th or 7th week of grand jury, which is helping us get caught up on a bunch of the cases that had either come in during the shutdown or just prior to. So we're averaging about 4 to 5 cases each Thursday. It's a little slower than we would hope, but the protocols and processes of getting people moved in and out is just slower. Local courts are all up and running. I actually am sitting down in Village of Greenwich this afternoon. So they're all up and running. And, I think right now it works. The challenge that we're going to have is maintaining the limited number of bodies that are permitted inside the courtroom when the weather turns nasty. I mean, right now, most courts are simply leaving people outside and then calling them in. And there's not a single local court that we have that can accommodate all of the bodies. So I think that's going to be a real challenge for the local judges on how do they want to manage that come probably middle of October when it's a little bit cold standing out waiting for your name to be called. But those are up and running. And then in less than 2 weeks, we are part of a pilot program in New York for criminal jury trials in county courts. So we have 4 felony trials scheduled in 4 successive weeks starting September 14th. So that will be interesting to see how it works relative to presenting evidence and managing evidence and actually moving the cases along. If grand jury is an indication, it will be much slower than our county court judge is accustomed to, and we'd all kind of grown accustomed to. So, but that'll be, hopefully it goes well so that other counties across the state can begin doing the same. It seems like they chose 2 or 3 counties in each judicial district around the state to be the test cases. So by your meeting in October, we'll have hopefully have completed 3 of the 4 criminal trials. But other than that, business is brisk. We are on par with last year's as far as arrest numbers go and in cases, and last year was significantly higher than prior years. So, but the discovery systems we put in place are working. IT has been was really helpful in all of the necessary upgrades that we needed to be able to push stuff through to stay in compliance.
Tony, after 4 trial experiment, when you think the courts will get back into a more full schedule? You think that will occur soon, or?
Our county court is in full. I mean, they're all in full schedule except trials now. And so I think if I were to guess, I would say OCA is looking at November in the non-pilot counties, because that's what they've told, like Warren County, to expect trials starting in November. So I think they're going to measure how it goes around the state. make necessary tweaks or adjustments. As far as trials in local court, right now they can do bench trials, but they can't do jury trials. So quite frankly, most of our courts wouldn't have space for 6 people, much less the number that would have to come in for a jury pool. So, I'm not sure what OCA is ultimately going to do to try to address that issue, but they're pushing hard. Obviously, that's a big part of our system and protecting the defendants and the victims. So I think once we get through October, November in county court, we'll know more, probably December, January, as to what they're going to do with local courts.
Thank you, Tony. Any questions for Tony?
Great, thank you.
Thank you, Tony. Chris, you ready?
I have the information. So assigned counsel is in need of 4 new file cabinets in order to make room for the remainder of the 2020 files and the upcoming 2021 files. It looks as though they have worked with my folks to spec out, and they're requesting to move $2,000 from their 4420 line into their office supply line.
That's it. Have a motion?
Motion, pleasure.
Second. Discussion?
What's the line they're moving it from, Chris?
4420, which is miscellaneous contractual.
Oh, okay.
Anything else, Chris, or
No, that's it.
discussion?
Outside service.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion granted. Public defender. Mike?
Good afternoon. I've already reported that to date this year, we've received approximately $1,100,000 in revenue. There was an additional $40,000 in revenue in the month of August, and on my calculations, there's another $87,000 in revenue due before the end of the year. And again, the collection of this is with significant assistance from the county administrator and the county treasurer. But I think that we're in pretty good shape on the revenue with Indigent Legal Services, which is offering funding for many of the programs we're engaged in. We have a technology issue as far as we are regularly using all of our data as part of the discovery that we're receiving from the district attorney's office. I've talked to information technology and we're working on it, but I'm just making it clear with respect to public safety, I am requesting additional data and new computers, and I have put those requests into the information technology office. I have one employee that is out on maternity leave. As a result of that, I moved some space around at the office to accommodate social distancing. And I just want to be clear, the employee returns October 13th. And before that, I will have to do something again to move an employee to make sure that they're socially distanced per the protocol. So, and again, I've put that, I'm dealing with buildings and grounds and county administration on that. I'm just, some of these issues also are relevant to preparing for another shutdown. So I'm just trying to be clear about them as far as the office space and the computers. Otherwise, I echo what the district attorney said. We are back up and running at full volume, and the one delay is that they're not trying cases like we were before. But we are back and operating basically at full volume. And I don't have anything else at this time. Oh, I do.
Thank you.
I'm sorry. There are the new records retention guidelines that just came out, and there is a special section for attorney, counsel, and public defender. And my initial reading of it appears that absent instructions from the clients, that we basically need to keep the files for a very, very, very long time. So that's going to create a new issue with respect to file storage. But I think we're early in that process, and these guidelines just came out. But it doesn't seem, we have regularly destroyed files after 7 years, and I don't think we're going to be able to do that again. So, and I would say we're not going to be destroying any files until further notice, but the new guidelines seem to suggest that we need to keep them for 80 years after the date of the birth of the client concerned, absent specific instructions from them to either destroy it or to give it to them. So that's a new issue. And unless anybody has any questions, I don't have anything further at this time.
Chris?
Mike, in the new retention schedule, is it that you have to maintain a hard copy or just a reproducible copy?
The file must continue to be maintained until death of the client concerned. Yeah, it appears to be the actual file.
Okay.
That's page 22, subsection 95. I've really only reviewed it once, but it seems it's going to require a different method of record keeping.
Brian?
Mike, do you know what's driving this specifically or no?
The records retention?
Yeah.
I don't, but it seems to apply to all attorneys. It's in the county section. I think it's applicable to everybody.
Yeah, no, just that you were destroying them at 7 years and you think that's going away. I was wondering what was driving that, if there was some specific situation that happened or. Okay.
Actually, there is a specific section for public defender. I don't know what is driving it as far as why it needs to basically be maintained forever, unless they have specific instructions otherwise. I don't know, but I do know this new schedule that came out, page 22, section 95, subsection B, is specifically for public defenders. And it does indicate that file must continue to be maintained until death or 80 years after date of birth, absent specific instructions from the client.
Yeah, these are costs that people don't realize how quickly they add up when you start storing all that.
Yeah, and we already have space issues, and we share space with the assigned counsel office, and they have space issues. So it's a new issue.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
But you do have the option at the client's behest to give them the records?
Well, the client could consent to destroying the file or to taking possession of the file themselves after the initial 6-year period. I have to maintain the file for 6 years. After that, to destroy it, you would need the client's consent.
Oh, maybe that's an avenue.
We might be able to obtain, and we might be able to obtain it just as part of a normal process, but I think the whole thing needs to be reviewed a little more closely.
Dana Hogan?
Mike, I apologize if you covered it. Can we not scan and image these documents and retain them electronically?
We aren't presently, but I think the new record retention guidelines, that this is regarding a hard file, not a digital file. So I'll have to look into that, and I can definitely get you an answer.
Well, because the reason I asked is because Kingsbury, when we went through, we worked with the county. You guys may all remember that. Oh God, it was a grant that Stephanie Lemmer had got, and we had scanned a lot of the imaging from the town files, and we were able to store them electronically. And I think they had the technology now and the capability at the clerk's office to do all that kind of stuff.
I will look into that.
Lost Mike? I think Mike was done.
As our town lawyer once said, common sense and law don't always meet. But it's a great point by Mr. Hogan. It'd be nice if we could do it electronically, but they specifically are telling us we have to keep the hard copy. That gets expensive.
I'm sorry I was cut off, but I will look into all of this and try to have more information for next month's meeting.
Thank you, Mike. Any more questions for Mike?
And in the meantime, we won't destroy any files.
Don?
Without consent,
I know that after the first pass, there was indications we did apply for a second grant to continue the scanning process. But if memory serves me correctly, we got denied for that grant. So I don't know if you wanted to extend the personnel processing to do that at that point. So I think that Stephanie's next step is try and apply for the grant again too. So I don't know how it fits in the records retention program and hard copy versus others, but I think it's something to look into.
anything else for Mike? Public safety? Tim?
Good afternoon. September is National Public Safety or National Preparedness Month, All across the nation, emergency management and public safety related departments are stressing the importance and spreading the message of disasters don't wait, make your plan today. Many thanks to our partners in the towns and villages and other public safety agencies and public health and the communities who continue to help spread this word and raise awareness with our disaster preparedness efforts of making a plan, building a kit, and staying informed. Our emergency management office for the county has received emergency management accreditation through New York State. Over the last few years, we had worked on progressing our county's emergency management organization and our efforts forward, both within the department, our partner agencies, and the municipalities within the county. We decided to work towards the goal of having our county emergency management office recognized as an accredited emergency management agency with the state of New York and under the state and New York State Emergency Management Association accreditation program. In early August, our department underwent a full assessment of our emergency management operation to include our plans, procedures, and policies, which included all aspects of our organization. On August 13th, we received official notification from the Accreditation Council that we had received our accreditation through the local emergency management accreditation program. We're thankful for the opportunity to participate in the program, review all aspects of our operations, and improve where we were able to, and continue to strive for the excellence that our partner agencies and our communities expect from us and rely on our team. Our grant updates, our radio project, we are still on a soft hold at this point. We continue to work with our vendor to get back going on the radio project and continue the migration to the newer radios and simulcast for the frequencies that we have not done yet. Our 911 system, we are set to complete the remaining tasks and close out that project at the end of September. And then we will be progressing forward in the beginning, with the beginning of the text to 911 integration as soon as this project is complete. We received notification on August 11th that we received our fiscal year 2020 emergency management performance grant to the amount of $28,272. That will be allocated in accordance with the grant guidance and requirements. That's a grant that's from the federal government but administered through the state. And that has a 50%, we do a 50% soft match for that. We're requesting acknowledgement of the award and the funding be allocated to the appropriate accounts by the treasurer. And then we'll give the resolution data to the finance committee meeting.
Need a motion to, move that to finance? Dave, second? Any discussion? All in favor? Opposed? Resolution passes. But
Just continuing on our report, project update on the CAD system. We continue to move forward on that. We do still have some outstanding items. August 11th was our last meeting with the team on that, so we are making some headway. We're trying to eliminate the old mobile piece, or the classic mobile, that has been proven to cause some of the crash issues for the vendor, so we're hoping to get that done soon. I know Lieutenant Lemery in the Sheriff's Office, we're working with a couple of local PDs that we're still trying to migrate off of that, and we're continuing to do our scheduled reboots with IT and the vendor, which is going very well. We have not had any issues with any of those, so it's been a great partnership with IT and the vendor on those. Our next meeting is September 15th at 2 p.m., so we're looking forward to continuing discussing those issues. Just an update on the coronavirus situation. We're still working with public health on that, on their preparedness, response, and continued monitoring. Public health is still actively involved every day with lots of cases following either the quarantines, the isolations, and obviously now the biggest thing that we're working on is the school partnerships. Schools continue to prepare for opening. All of them are opening in a hybrid fashion, which some in person depending on the grade level. Some are strictly at home, and some are doing a little bit of both, so they're dealing with all the challenges as they go through that. I will say they've been great partners with us. I mean, we've had many conference calls with them. We talk to the school personnel on a daily basis, either Patty, both of us, or somebody from our office. So public health is still doing great things as far as this goes. PPE distribution and supply, we do still have some PPE for anybody in need. The biggest thing we're currently encouraging everybody is now's the time, make sure you're ordering PPE before we see any more resurgence or anything else in the area, and it's very difficult to get those items. But if you do have an urgent need, please reach out and let us know. We'll see if we can help. We still have plenty of hand sanitizer and the cloth face coverings for anybody who's in need of those. And we're still continuing all the same policies and procedures everyone else is in the county. The communication center is still on restricted access, so employees only, and we're still following the screening. Just a couple updates on some significant recent weather events. There was an EF1 tornado confirmed that touched down in Argyle in the Goose Island area back on August 10th. The National Weather Service came out and reviewed that area. They looked at the damage. The damage area was relatively small for the EF1 portion of it, but it did do considerable amount of damage to those people right there in the Goose Island area. There was some other damage in other areas of the town of Argyle and some of Casiuna. That's the only part they saw any evidence of an actual touchdown of a tornado. So, and I believe Chris and I were talking about this morning, that was the 5th or 6th, actually to date in the area of an actual tornado that touched down. So certainly we're seeing these events more frequently. Obviously, the most recent thing that we've dealt with here in the county is the severe thunderstorm and heavy rain event that hit Whitehall on the 24th. So they moved into the area relatively quickly, and they kind of sat around for an hour, 2 hours, and they dumped between 5 and 6 inches of rain in that time period, which obviously caused a lot of issues. Our comm center ended up processing over 80 storm-related calls, most of which were in the Whitehall area. We did have a few in Dresden and the town of Hampton, but the majority of everything was concentrated to the village of Whitehall. There were some town of Whitehall calls, but the majority was in the village. So we saw a backup of water and flooding that occurred on Broadway, which is State Route 22, for anybody who's not familiar, which also all the low-lying side streets had significant flooding on top of many homes, businesses, the Whitehall Municipal Center, which houses their town and village offices, the court and the police department, and the Whitehall Central School buildings there as well. We just put together a quick presentation that I'll just pull up on my screen so you can see it. Everybody who has a printed copy or who has the meeting packet has a copy of that as well. And hopefully you guys can see that. All right, so that picture that you see right on the cover, that's State Route 22, right in front of the church. This is just south of Saunders Street in the village of Whitehall. You can see the cement barrier there that blocks Broadway off from the railroad track right behind it. and you can see the water is right up to that. That's got to be 4.5, 5 feet maybe. But on August 24th, same thing that we kind of just talked about, up to 80 calls in that area. And just a quick, if you can see the screen, you can see that video. You can see that water is moving pretty fast. There's a break in the cement wall that are just past the vehicles down below that the water is actually pouring through. It was a metal grate there that actually ended up being bent over completely from the force of the water. But you can see how powerful that water was and how much piled up there. So any of that low-lying spot. And most people that you talk to from Whitehall that have been there for 60 or more years have never seen flooding in that area like this. Obviously, in the low-lying areas, we've seen some flooding here and there, but nothing like this. So the immediate response from the Whitehall Fire Department, the Whitehall Police Department, and the Village of Whitehall DPW was absolutely amazing. We were there, I don't know, maybe an hour into it, and every single person from every department that was out there. On top of all of those incidents that they were dealing with, the Village of Whitehall unfortunately took a tree to their 14-inch water main going out of their water plant, which shut down their water system to the entire village as well. So they had to conduct immediate repairs on that, on top of everything else that was happening in the village. Obviously, you could see the storm water system was completely inundated with water. There was nowhere for the water to go. Just that kind of water. Nobody plans for anything like that. That was just an insane amount of water. So the first responders were just absolutely amazing. I mean, we saw everybody from every fireman, police department personnel, DPW guys in waist-deep water or more, checking cars, checking houses, anything we had to do to get to make sure. And on some of the outlying areas, we had major trees. I believe we had 2 houses that were struck by trees, and we're talking about large trees. One of them, the house is no longer usable and will end up being taken down shortly. So it was pretty significant on multiple levels across. The village mayor did declare a state of emergency in the middle of this due to the storm conditions, the continuing water, the flooding, and the concern for the village's water infrastructure. So that ended up lasting through, I believe, Friday afternoon. We ended up rescinding that. And as the evening progressed, mutual aid assistance from 9 or 10 other fire departments came in, as well as law enforcement agencies, public works personnel from the county, the village of Granville, also offered to send assistance, code enforcement, and our state partners. So we were all very deep into this, for lack of better terms, as it went. And that situation lasted at least over the last week, and we're still dealing with some of the effects of this. But you can see, we just broke down to give you a good look at the type of calls that we had. There were 8 flooded roadways, flooded structures were 21, and there still were more than that. This was on the initial calls. 1 water rescue, there ended up being 2 people that had to be, I won't say rescued, but extricated from their house and have assistance on residences that were surrounded by water. Trees, wires down, 33. Trees on vehicles, 2. The trees on houses were 2. Did have a sinkhole, 1 vehicle off the roadway. We ended up with 4 submerged vehicles that were submerged up to at least halfway, if not more. Damage to utilities, furnace with fuel oil leaks were 5, and a grass and brush fire. On top of that, obviously, that was not in the middle of the flood area. That was on the outskirts where the trees and wires were down. So just a little bit of everything. These were some pictures that Superintendent D from the school shared with us. We spent some time with him as well out at the school. They suffered some significant damage out at the school. You can see in the top left, that's their parking lot with 3 of their vans out there in the middle of the water. So the issue they had there was the school. If you look at the bottom left, the high school, as reported by the superintendent, the envelope of the school actually held the water out. You can see on the screen, you know, there was a good amount of water outside the school. They had issues with the water coming in from their infrastructure from within. Their wastewater system, their drains, actually water came up in to almost every room in the high school. You can see one of their rooms that they have set up there with water in it, and you can see the gym floor actually is starting to buckle all around the entire gym. So they had some significant damage in the school. On top of those areas, they experienced significant damage in their pump room and their pool, which everything in there was brand new and is now in need of replacement. And they put 2 brand new boilers in, which were underwater and now are in need of replacement. So the school is working on navigating to make sure that they can do school. They're going to end up migrating to remote, which thankfully they were semi-prepared for since we were operating remotely before that. But the school folks out there had big challenges ahead of them. They had done a lot of work to get to this point and get ready for school, only to have this completely, be a major setback for them. On Wednesday, I believe the State Division of Homeland Security, OFDC, our fire partners at the state, sent in their damage assessment response team to go out and check a lot of structures. I think they ended up doing 61 structures in the village for safety purposes and identify needs for code enforcement moving forward. So that was a huge help.
How many?
61 houses or businesses they came in and did. So on top of that, we met the following day with code enforcement, the state personnel, the state individual assistance team, and John and his team were absolutely amazing. I mean, we had all personnel from code enforcement out in the field with us in Whitehall almost every day last week, and they ended up doing over 100 inspections of local residences, identifying urgent needs, identifying those that needed to be posted, identifying those that needed repairs. So not enough credit goes to John and their team. I mean, that's not something that probably any of them that are actively here working now have ever seen, where they all need to be out in the field on the same operation at the same time. So they did an absolutely amazing job. We're thankful to have them as partners. But you can see the breakdown of the calls. I won't go through all of them, but that was 101, and this was as of Friday. There have been additional that were added over the weekend. I know we had a couple other houses that we were out looking at over the weekend with the code enforcement officers. But that just gives you a breakdown of the types of things that code saw when they were evaluating those structures. So the recovery portion, we ended up setting up some distribution sites at the Whitehall Volunteer Fire Company. We were able to get some water generators and pumps from the state. We were able to get some flood buckets donated, which are basically buckets that contain a push broom, other cleanup supplies, bags, dish detergent, anything to help clean up after a flood. We had 100 that were donated by the Whitehall United Methodist Church and 50 that were donated by the Red Cross. And I think as of maybe yesterday, 130 of those have been distributed to the community. So that was a huge help. Whitehall Volunteer Fire Company's been absolutely amazing. They let us come in and basically borrow or take over parts of their station for the better part of last week for meetings. And they were with us every step of the way. We were out doing assessments. The fire chief was with us. And obviously they hosted the bottled water distribution and the flood bucket distribution. So they've been amazing partners up there as well. And to date, I believe the Red Cross and Salvation Army, we coordinated assistance for up to 9 families that needed emergency assistance that were put out of their homes, either temporarily or going to end up being permanently. So in getting them temporary assistance that night, the night afterwards, and then helping to find long-term solutions for right now. So on Friday, we were out with the state's individual assistance team conducting some assessments on properties, trying to look for any available funding for these folks that are in dire need up there. So we're looking at the potential of some small business administration, low-interest loans. None of that funding is guaranteed right now. The first step was to go out with the individual assistance team and do the assessments. And we were able to, I believe we assessed 33 properties, which included residential and small businesses. The number was 25 that we need to request an SBA disaster assistance declaration. So we're able to easily surpass that number. So that information is off to the state, and it will go to the governor for a request to be passed on to SBA. So we're waiting to hear from that, but we've had outrageous support from our elected officials, from every local official anywhere around, other agencies. We just very much appreciate everybody that's reached out and offered assistance and been there at every step of the way. The town and village are still partially out of their offices. There was restoration companies there working last week to identify what type of damage they had. Obviously, some of that building was carpeted. The village PD had a hardwood floor in there. That all came up and was literally floating around on the floor. So a lot of electronics damage, anything that was on the floor, anything that had any kind of water involvement. So it's been pretty significant for them up there as well. And I know Supervisor Roselle and Mayor Smith, we've been in contact with them just about every day since, and they're all trying to progress forward as best they can. So all the assistance is greatly appreciated, and obviously this is going to continue for a while up there. When we hear from SBA, we'll probably set up an SBA assistance site up there where we're going to open it up to the community, and anybody who's eligible, we'll help them through that process to see what kind of assistance we can get to them. All right, I think that is all
all we have unless anybody has any questions.
Any questions for Tim or Glenn? Thank you.
Thank you.
John?
All right, good afternoon, everybody. First thing that I wanted to ask about was, wondering if we can waive the permit fees for Whitehall, properties that were affected. I'm up on their plate at the moment. I wanted to bring that out there for discussion for you folks.
I'll move it for discussion.
Okay. John?
Yes.
How many, permits does this involve?
We're gonna have, at the moment, we have possibly about 100 permits, so.
And, what does it, cost per permit?
The low end is gonna be $50, and it could go up from there, so.
So in the neighborhood of $5,000 to $6,000?
Yep.
Building permits?
Yes.
Construction permits, renovation permits, things like that? Or
Just for the damage, to repair the damages.
Okay.
It wouldn't apply to any, new projects.
So you would do all your regular process and inspect it to make sure it's all, that you just want to weigh the cost involved?
Yeah, we cannot waive the requirement of permit according to state, but we can waive the permit.
So this would be for flood damage, nothing prior to?
Correct.
But, Brian?
Does it also include demolition too?
I would say yes, anything related.
I just want to make sure that, people aren't questioning, well, that was what you talked about. I just want to make sure it's all included.
And this is not recoupable in any other state program, FEMA, NIPCO, anywhere else?
Not that I'm aware of. That's kind of outside of my mouth.
Mr. Hicks, the short answer to that is, if I understand right, I mean, he's the expert, but, for FEMA eligibility for funding, we'd have to reach an aggregate total of $30 million in damage. And this is where the fact that the storm was literally just parked over the village of Whitehall hurts us. If it had been a couple counties, a couple towns, probably get to that threshold, we'd be asking the governors to submit for FEMA for a disaster declaration, all that stuff, but we don't think we're gonna reach that threshold.
So there's no help for them at all at any level, so this is really all we can do to help.
Well, I think they've been creative in trying to get the SBA loans. So,
Yeah.
Because that's not your normal, avenue, but I think they were pretty creative to get that set up. But to Mr. Campbell's point, no, that's about all we can do, I think.
What would be the staffing that you would have to use to finish the process?
The way that we handled, the canvassing of the area there is, we all had different areas that we covered and handed out our business cards to everybody that we talked to about the property. So as people are coming in for permits or have questions about it, they would call the person that contacted them in the field. Currently, we have one person who normally would cover, amongst other areas, the village and the town of Whitehall, but it would be way too much for one person to be handling. So we'll all be stepping out at different times to help her with her area.
So it would occur as they submit their permits?
Correct.
So it would be gradual in a sense, or unknown?
There's a lot of evaluation still going on. It could potentially all get dropped in our laps at once, or it could be, I would think it's probably gonna be closer to, that scenario, because there was a lot of boilers and furnaces and water heaters, things that people need, sooner than later.
Dave?
I think you hit on part of it, that they're gonna have to get, quotes and plans done, so there's only X number of contractors to do some of that, and so you don't know whether it's gonna be quick or which.
The process is gonna get started quicker, but as to when the work actually gets going, like you said with the contractors, it might take a little longer.
Some of these are, for them to live there, are critical fixes. Is there ability to fast track that?
There is, the state allows for repairs to be made without a permit in place, and then it can be handled after the fact.
So they have to do a permit or just get it inspected?
They, for our tracking purposes, we would want a permit and to verify that what they're doing and what they had done is code compliant, so we would need that full permit for it.
The problem isn't doing it now. The problem is when you want to sell the property and somebody says, I need proof that it's used to. So giving them a permit is the way, then they have that document in their hand, so if they want to sell, do something else, close to the property, they have the proof that was done. Just like the original CO when you buy a house or remodel or something like that. So since your fees are set by resolution, you can waive your fees by resolution. The trick would be in any kind of resolution, not trick, but the issues in a resolution would be when are we starting it, and you could make it retroactive if you wanted to. Where does it apply? The geographical area, so John knows where it applies, and for how long? When's it going to end?
So next step, would this have to go to full board for
Yes, because
waiver?
the department and the processes are established by local law, but the local law says the board shall set fees by resolution. So to waive the fees, the board has to pass the resolution.
We have to go to finance?
Not, like, that's, I guess, up to you if you want. You know, this morning we talked about giving things a bigger look. If you want to do that, you can, but it has to get to the board somehow, what path it takes. You're foregoing for lack of a better term, a disaster windfall in fees.
Correct, so to directly to Mr. Ward's question, I don't think it has to go to finance in that there are no budget amendments required. You may want it to go to finance because the ramification, the other side of this coin is a lack of revenue that you may otherwise experience. So if that's something you want to discuss at finance, then yeah, I think that's appropriate. I don't think you have to because there's no structural change to the budget needed to accomplish this.
And you're taking a finite resource and reallocating it. So you may be reallocating it from a project that you might have gotten a fee from to a project you might not have gotten a fee from.
Correct.
Because they've only got so many people and so many hours in the day that can do this. So will there be no effect? I don't know if you can say that at this point.
Right, I mean, there probably will be an effect.
Bob, did you raise your hand?
Yeah, can we make that conditional? In addition to a geographic area and the time, we make it, flood related?
It would be for permits that are determined by the department to be as a consequence or result of a storm on whatever date.
Right, Whitehall.
Right. Blank check.
On all the
Right.
boat permits.
Yeah, no, so if you got a permit before, unless the work you were doing was affected by the storm, in which case you might have to apply for a different, like a demolition permit to start over or something like that, or you put in a brand new boiler on a permit and then, it has to be re-inspected, that fee would be waived. And then it would have to be, and code could determine this as a result of the storm that was on whatever.
But I think to Mr. Henke's point, if somebody goes to put in a pool right now, that wouldn't qualify, right? Because that's not in response to damage caused by the storm of August 24th.
Well, it hold water.
It would.
Dave?
No, it wasn't just Whitehall that was affected, though Whitehall seems to be affected much more in a disaster form than other towns, which should we add, like Dresden and parts of Hampton? We got the rain, but I haven't heard of any damage, but just in case it came up, should we incorporate something like that into there, just in case?
That's gonna be your challenge with the definitions, because we've had a lot of rainstorms over the summer for that matter.
But
probably a lot of,
tornado and Goose Island.
Right, a lot of individual things have happened, so the challenge you're going to have, quite frankly, is to if you want to define that area more broadly, you then open yourself up to, I had damage from a rainstorm. Why is my rainstorm not as important as their rainstorm? And things like that. So what you have to do is come up with a definition, and Mr. Hicks quotes me often when I say, when you draw a line, there are going to be people on the other side. Unless you do it for everybody, there's going to be people on the other side of that line wherever you draw it.
Have you heard of any damage in Dresden?
I don't believe we've had any,
If you haven't been called by now, I would say you can
on top of a hill.
define it.
They're on top of a hill.
There's some low-lying areas there.
The same storm, it could be the wind from that storm that they're falling on.
it was a pretty narrow spot.
I mean, I would have heard of damage in Hampton. I'm not saying none happened, but I haven't heard of any. I would have.
Frank?
I believe that. Anyway, as far as going to finance, I think because you can't determine what the number is, it's almost pointless to bring this to finance because we don't know what revenue is going to be lacking or because we don't know how much is going to come out of this. My other point, I think, is more, is the end date written in stone, or is that going to be decided by code enforcement when they know they've gotten, so like cases will be open, but they won't necessarily get the inspection done the week that the job's done. It might take longer because there's such a big amount. So is there going to be an absolute end date, or there has to be a file claim by a certain date?
So the way I would envision doing it, I think there's a couple opportunities, but one way you could do it is to say, the applicable fees for all projects applied for by the end of September in response to the August 24th storm are hereby waived.
Okay.
It doesn't matter when the inspection happens, when the construction happens, as long as the permit is applied for by the end of September or the project commences by the end of September, you're fine.
Okay, I like that. I just wanted to kind of wanted to define where we were going.
And are we going to, and also there may be subsequent, correct me if I'm wrong, John, you can get a permit, a building permit, and then there may be others, like a septic permit is also required, and then other permits and costs that flow from that initial application. So,
Right.
Are we saying everything that flows from that initial application we're waiving? Are we saying that it's just the initial one? Maybe I'm making up a problem that doesn't really exist, so I'm kind of looking at John to that.
Could be.
I could be, because.
Lawyers are great at that.
Lawyers are great at talking, and I'm really good.
Yeah, you are.
So, we want to make sure that we understand the scope of what we're doing.
I think the intent, based on the conversation, is that all permit fees
Related to
related.
that project.
Correct. So that would be my intent. Now, whether it comes up or not is a John question, but.
Do we want to leave the discretion with John, or are we going to have it written in stone? That's my question.
If the committee is comfortable with it and there is consensus among the committee to pursue this, maybe, I think we've got a good idea of what your intentions are, and then maybe Roger and John and I should work up language.
Yeah.
Very good.
I think you want to, Brian, define the size of the stone and let John write on it.
Yeah.
Yep.
I would rather have something that I can point to than have.
Right.
That's kind of where I wanted to be.
And something that you can point to when a constituent comes to you and says, what about?
Yep. Matt?
Well, there's also an opportunity cost here, too, because of all the time you're gonna be spending and not getting the fees in Whitehall. That means you can't collect building permit fees in the whole rest of the county while you're spending time in Whitehall. So really, it could be a double whammy from a financial standpoint, potentially.
Well, the other one would
There would be
potentially
delays in those other applications. Now, they still would be perfect, but it could be delayed.
Tim, did you have something before?
Just wanted to touch on the calls that were in the town of Dresden. We did have, I think we're about 7 or 8 towns Dresden calls, which were mostly tree and wire town, but we did have at least one residential flooded basement and a couple of roadways that were flooded. So there were some calls up there.
additional discussion?
You wanna go to finance just so you can give us a little time to
I
work up
was
the
just wondering about
language?
that.
So you
You
don't
can
just
see
see
the
it on
language
for
before
the
it gets
first
to the
time
full
at
board.
a full board.
Yeah,
meeting?
that way we give us a chance to correct it. You've got day and a half.
Dana?
Quite a few years ago, Salem flooded out from the White Creek. Was anything like this done then? I'm concerned about where you draw the line, because unless you have somebody that owns 10 properties in Whitehall, their damage is just as significant to them as damage in Salem or Hartford and some rainstorm that may affect 4 houses in somewhere. I'm kind of looking at the fairness of this. Why would this be more fair than any other damage to anybody else's house in a rainstorm? Just because there's a lot in Whitehall, that doesn't make it any more painful for those people, unless you own many, many properties. There's something I'm missing here, and I don't think this was done in Salem.
Sue?
I would like to speak to that. I don't believe it was done in Salem either, but I think the concept is important. But I do think that if we put this into place, that it needs to stay in place when there's an emergency situation going on, that it is not just a one-time deal. And so we need to think about that, because, okay, Whitehall, these folks have had a wild ride. And if we can help them, I think that's wonderful. But there's other times that other areas have wild rides too. And is the same procedure going to be put in place? We're setting a new precedent. So going forward, I like to think about going forward fairly and equitably, and making sure that we think about that. But I think it's, John and Tim and everybody else that was up in Whitehall, I went up the day after, and these people were hit hard. And if we can help them in a short space of time, I think that's a good thing. I think we should do that. But I also know that, having looked for somebody to fix a hot water tank yesterday, the people that are doing infrastructure type things, the real estate is booming, and you cannot find a plumber or an electrician or get some of these pieces of equipment in place. So 30 days, John, is that going to work? Or, as far as, are you going to have the manpower? Would you have the ability to get what you need?
I will be addressing the manpower shortly.
Okay. Was just wondering.
They call that a softball.
Sue's got a point, and that is the first one is always easy.
Exactly.
Yeah, very good point.
Right.
Having a date like a month out or 2 months out as far as the applications, I personally think that would be a good idea to have a cutoff at that point. The work from our office may not be finished in the next couple of months, depending on, if they get a permit, and it might take them, another month or whatever to get somebody in there to actually do the work. But we're all working hard to get the folks up there reset. So.
Brian?
Well, I think a month to get the applications filed, I think is probably long enough, because if you don't get to the work, it carries on further. So I think the month probably works that way. The second thing, what's different about this one, even with Salem, CMO and FEMA were involved. We're on an island alone on this one. I think that's what's really different here, is that it was such a small scale that you haven't got CMO or FEMA even coming in. So not that helped individual homeowners a lot, but it's a little bit different that it's that type of a storm than one that's broad, where you get a lot of outside assistance. This is the first one where we had really no outside assistance.
Very widespread damage. It was a consolidated area, but the percentage of damage was pretty widespread. And from what I've heard in talking to some of the owners there during our inspection, a lot of them aren't sure if insurance is gonna cover anything, so that's what my thought was as far as helping them if we can.
Okay.
As much as it pains me to try to do something for the Knights of Whitehall coming from Granville, I'd like to move this to finance that gives them time to put together a resolution that we can vet through a little closer. So I'd like to make the motion that we waive the fees.
And move it to finance?
Move it to finance.
Have a second?
Get a second by Sue.
Sue? Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Move it forward.
All right, now to what you were talking about, Sue, as far as personnel here. I got a little presentation here. Whoops, I hit the wrong button. One moment. Okay. I think this is it. All right. There we go. This is my first PowerPoint presentation in like 15 years. All right. Before I get started on this part, what I wanted to say was that I'd love the opportunity to sit down individually with each one of the supervisors to go over what I'm asking for today. Having said that, I'll get right into it. Even before all the extra stresses that this past month has brought us, which I'll get into shortly, our office has been short-staffed. Before recent events, our office covered all of the county except for the town of Cambridge, town of Fort Edward, town of Easton, and the villages of Hudson Falls and Fort Edward. Our present staff, we have one code enforcement officer, or CEO, that covers all of the reviews and inspections for sewage disposal systems in our territory. He covers all of the reviews and inspections in our jurisdiction. For fire inspections, we have one code enforcement officer. He is still in training, and he covers all of the fire inspections in our jurisdiction. We have 4 CEOs for the construction side of our business. They cover all the reviews and inspections for new building projects, additions and alterations in our area. They also handle property maintenance issues, property complaints from neighbors and others, and BWAPs, building without permits. I'm going to go into each one of these briefly. As far as sewage disposal systems, over the last 5 years, there's been an average of 132 permits for new systems or modifications. Each one of these has to be designed by an engineer and reviewed by our inspector. The review process often requires numerous calls to the engineer and numerous reviews due to the required changes. Once everything is approved, he handles all of the inspections of the systems. I say he because currently it's the guy that's doing it, although that could change in the future. Okay, when the plans aren't followed, he usually finds that out after he's gone out to inspect what they already installed. So he has to oversee getting new as-built drawings done. He then has to review them again, and occasionally that requires additional calls to the engineer. And then he has to go back out and re-inspect the system to make sure that everything matches up. He also, pardon me? Yes?
Is this, okay. The average number is 132.
Yep.
132 over 5 years, or 132 a year? Every year for 5 years?
A year.
A year.
Okay.
Okay. Of those 132, how many of them aren't done right the first time, that you have to go back through all this?
This is one of the projects that I'm going to be working on at some point, is getting all of the engineers and designers on the same page.
Because, I mean, that one time should be all it takes to design one of these.
Should be, often is not.
But, I mean, that's making us far more work, and so if we can get them out, I like the way you said that, that you're Gotta try to get everybody on the same page, because
Right.
you shouldn't have to go through 10 tries to get one system, because that's like 1,320 instead of 132. So I guess that's the concern. The other thing is, are any of these people cross-trained, so if somebody's not doing something, they can help out on one of these?
We have, the gentleman that handles the septic systems at the moment does all of the reviews for it, because that is his background in installing and designing them. We can and have had people go out to do inspections, basically matching Part A with what's on paper,
Okay.
Part B, that kind of stuff. But his expertise is knowing what needs to be there. That has been brought up as an option. We'll get into it with the fire inspections too, having a person in their territory do everything. It's not necessarily the most efficient, effective way at this point with the training, specialized trainings as we have in the office.
Okay. Dana Hogan, you had a question?
Don, can we let John finish his presentation before we start questions? Because he may answer the questions that people have as he goes through this presentation.
I will get back to it.
Okay, John.
All right, so they also have to investigate complaints from neighbors. We get a lot of calls where the neighbors smell septic from their neighbor's place. We have to go out and check those. And there's also BWAPs, building without permits, in this field too. Okay, as far as fire inspections, all of these numbers are approximate, but we have 156 assembly occupancies. Those would be restaurants, churches, other gathering places. 127 businesses, 16 educational occupancies, 25 factories, 110 mercantile occupancies, 47 storage occupancies, 175 residential occupancies. Those residential occupancies are the actual buildings. They're not the number of units. For the number of units, we have over 1,000 individual units. Some of these different occupancies have to be inspected once a year, like the assemblies. Some of them, it's every 3 years. So when you figure out how many they are and how often they have to be inspected, you're talking about 600 inspections, again, a guesstimation for one person in 1 year. The really tricky part with this is scheduling. These owners are not required to contact our office to set up these inspections under the current situation that we have. I have ideas how we could change that, but that's a topic for a different day. We now have to reach out to them. So say, for instance, there's a apartment complex that needs to be inspected. We would reach out to the owners. They would have to contact each of the individual renters to make sure that they were going to be there on a particular day. There's a lot of phone calls going back and forth. Again, I have other ideas for that would help in the future, but this is what we have at the moment. Currently, we're behind on these inspections by triple digits because of our current staffing situation. And fire inspections are often put on hold when the construction season gets busy. Construction projects. Over the past 5 years, there's been an average of about just over 500 permits each year. With the 4 people that I mentioned, 4 CEOs that we have currently doing that, that's 120 plus projects. No, that's even more. I was thinking 5 people. 120, what does that mean?
125.
More than that, there you go, 125. With these different projects, there can be anywhere from 1 inspection per project to over 10. If somebody's putting in a pool, it's usually one inspection. If somebody's building a house, it could be 10 or 12. So if you average those out, you're talking about 500 inspections per year per CEO. They have to go out and do the reviews. Well, not go out, they have to review the plans, they have to do the inspections. They also have to investigate complaints from neighbors. They have to investigate VWAPs. They have to investigate property maintenance issues. And currently, our department is basically living kind of like a household that lives paycheck to paycheck. If anything unexpected happens, it can throw the whole thing out of whack. In the last month, 4 unexpected things, or last 4 to 6 weeks, 4 unexpected things have happened, and our office is currently pretty much in crisis mode. A couple of months ago, we discussed in Public Safety Committee about sending out renewal letters. We generally do those the month before they're due, so that they're spanned out over the year. Due to things that were discussed during that meeting, it was decided to send them all out up to the date of that meeting. That was 850 plus renewal letters. Let me back up one there. Some of these, there are simple fixes where they just basically send us a check, we renew it, and they move it on to the next year. However, a lot of these, they want final inspections. They're calling to find out what do they need. We have to go out and check, then we have to do all of that stuff. Some of them are pretty far behind and missing a lot of information, so that's added a lot of work. We have one code enforcement officer who is resigning. The remaining officers in the office will now have to cover those territories in addition to what they already have for heavy workloads. And this will have to continue until we have that position filled with a person that is certified as a CEO, which could take 6 months or longer. The third unexpected thing is the town of Cambridge no longer has a certified code enforcement officer, so the responsibilities for that town have been handed to our office. All of the permits that are open for the town of Cambridge will now have to be re-reviewed by our office in order to verify their code compliance. Any previous inspections will need to be reevaluated by our office, and any non-code compliant work will need to be corrected by the contractors. So far, our office has only received the open permits for 2020. We're unable to do any inspections on the older ones, or on any of the permits until we have the project files, and like I said, we had to review those, make sure that what was approved is actually code compliant. The last unexpected thing is the damage from the storms. Public safety did an incredible job overseeing everything. I went up there when we found out that the DART team was coming, and I asked the guy who was in charge of the DART team, who's in charge. He said, "You are." So I was learning as we were going. So it would be nice if we could have a little bit of flexibility so that everything else in the department didn't have to stop if an emergency like this occurred in the future. As was already mentioned, we had to look into 100 homes, and that number is growing. We've already discussed some of that stuff. So each of these things, if they came in one at a time, we would be able to absorb. It would be some growing pains. There'd be some lots of overtime. There'd be additional work, additional hours, but we'd be able to get through it. All 4 things at once have really turned this into a crisis mode for our department. Yeah. So, in order to effectively provide the services that New York State requires, we need more staff. In order to have them trained in time for the next busy season, which starts generally in March to April, we need them as soon as possible. I'm coming to you to ask you for one more additional fire inspector to help catch up on that backlog. We could actually use 2, but I'm asking for 1 at the moment. and 2 additional code enforcement officers. We cover 90% now that we have Cambridge too. We cover 90% of the 840 plus square miles of the county and 75% of the population. Without these additional people, contractors will have a harder time getting inspections because we'll be busy out in the field. Fire inspections will continue to be overdue. Project reviews will take longer to complete. Property maintenance issues will remain unchecked, and concerns from neighbors will go unanswered. So that's the sunshiny report that I have for you.
Any thoughts or questions? Yeah.
Where's the sun?
Yeah.
I don't know if I either.
Trying to get back to my screen here.
Dana? Hogan?
Hey, John, just a quick question on fire inspections. You had indicated there's 600 inspections per year. Is that correct?
Yes.
And you base that off of the number, the volume with, let's see, assemblies, businesses. That's the number. Is that where you got that 600 number?
Correct.
My understanding in the past is those inspections don't have to be done annually. Was I mistaken?
Some of them have to be done annually, like assemblies, so like restaurants and churches, things like that. Other ones, like the residential settings, had to be done every 3 years. So what I did on those was everything that had to be done per year, I added that whole amount. Everything that had to be done 3 years, I divided the total by 3 and added that to a single year's total.
I came up with a number of about 640, but they don't have to be done every year, correct?
For which one?
Well, for the total volume, if you're talking the average. So if we have 640 of these, only the assemblies have to be done annually. Am I correct in saying that?
Only the assemblies and the educational ones have to be done every year. So that's 156 plus 16. Our businesses are every 3 years. Factories, mercantile, storage units, and the apartment buildings are every 3 years. But what I did for that was I used the 1,000 units and divided that by 3, because it's not just, each unit is basically its own inspection.
So each residential unit in a commercial residential building is its own inspection?
Basically, yes. We try to obviously consolidate those all into one visit.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Matt?
Brian, doesn't this dovetail into the situation you've tried to present the last few years, that when it comes to changes in staffing pattern and adding employees that do it at budget time, which is where we're at right now?
Yeah, we're trying not to add new positions the next year, but this is a case where this is this year and you're in a chaotic situation. So anything you add now will be in next year's budget. I mean, but I think we have to look at this at this point. I don't
want to look at it before we get too deep into the budget, because the ramifications of making
Right.
a decision now, you could find out 5 weeks from now and say, oh my God, I wish we had done that. Or I wish we had done that.
Well, yeah, but the problem is, if it has to be done, you'd rather have it built in. And I think we may be at that position this time.
That kind of countermands your policy or
Yeah.
process.
No, you're absolutely right.
So,
I don't like the situation, but I can see where he's at. He was stressed enough when we had when Cambridge just came on board. Now Whitehall's hit, and everything that they were doing has stopped while they're in Whitehall. That's a bad position to be in because it hurts every one of our towns. Anything that was being built or going to be built is on pause until they can get back at those inspections. And so this is far dire that it's not just about where the problem is. Now it's how do we take care of the situation going forward for actually building and rebuilding our entire county going forward. And so this is one that really needs looking at, and we are at budget time. So to me, the timing is perfect. We either decide we're going this way or we're not, and then we know how to deal with
budget
that.
time is to look at the whole big universe all at once rather than doing it piecemeal piecemeal here and there, right?
Typically, yes. This department right now, you kind of have to, it's under the microscope because of where it's at. I don't know how else you could look at it. There's no other way to look at it.
Dave?
Yes, there is.
Why, just think with the number of people that are involved, with one person leaving and the training that's coming up, I don't think by March you'd have everybody trained and ready to go, and that's the problem.
So I look at this and I say we have a lot of unknowns coming up in terms of our budget and impact what the governor may or may not do. But have we ever done an analysis? The 3 people are going to come with a cost. Have we ever done an analysis of how much revenue from fees that code enforcement officer brings in? Does it cover 10% of the 10% of their cost? Salary and benefits, does it cover 20%, 50%, 75%? I'm just curious because that would make a difference on the impact in the budget.
Chris?
So right now, the total code enforcement revenue for everything is, I'll go to last year's actual, okay? So last year's actual was $125,000.
So it basically covers 2 people.
So the board has some numbers, because hey, I'm a numbers guy. A code enforcement officer is a grade 12. The base for a grade 12, these are 2020 numbers, not 21. 2020 base is $20.54 an hour. They work 40 hours a week, which in this year is 2,096 hours a year. Hopefully my fingers work, and that is a $43,052 salary. Add 50% for fringe, and you get to $64,577 as the total position cost for a full-time code enforcement officer. So to Mr. O'Brien's point, you've got roughly the entire departmental revenue is enough to offset 2 code enforcement officers.
But you're talking apples and oranges. He's talking about the marginal cost. The marginal cost of adding 1, 2, or 3 more people versus the marginal revenue of those additions. That's a different calculation.
It's very different, and I would argue that John certainly knows the industry much better than I, but marginally, if there are 500 construction projects a year, I find it hard to believe that if we added a code enforcement officer, we would get another 100 construction projects. To a certain extent, I think the demand for that is relatively inelastic with regard to that, to the code enforcement officer. Therefore, if we add one, we might get 505 projects. So I think your marginal increase in revenue is not relevant.
Right, so it's gonna be an increase in expense with no revenue increase really to speak of.
Yeah, I mean, I think largely what we're talking about here is, unfortunately, revenue independent. It is purely operational, right? It's with the resources they're given, can the department meet their mandate? I think right now the code enforcement administrator is trying to indicate to the board he does not feel he can.
But on the flip side, wasn't one of your requests to have a guy do just fire inspections? Right. Wouldn't that change the whole revenue procedure? If he got that person, then you'd see a huge increase in revenue from him being 40 hours a week doing fire inspections, correct?
There would be another required step by the board to get there. I think we can do that.
Because we have a large backlog that could take 2 years.
Right.
To catch up on, that would increase some of the
So the staff
revenue.
requests are really apples and oranges to some degree. One may have a revenue side, one may not.
Good.
Bob?
I was gonna make basically the same point, that we are, putting another position on is not gonna generate more revenue. So, Chris made it perfect.
There are ideas that I have as far as bringing in more revenue. Need time to start working on those. One is related to fire inspections. Currently, there are no charges for fire inspections. Another one.
I lost that one a couple years ago.
Another one.
We may need to reconsider that, and that was what I was alluding to with Mr. Hicks, is that there could be a way to generate a revenue for fire inspections if we take some action by the board. And I have yet to have a conversation with Roger know what steps those are and if we are authorized by the state to take those steps.
We waived it for not-for-profit.
That was the occupancy permit, which is different than the fire inspection.
Another one I would like to revisit is just the overall fee schedule. I want to contact some of our neighboring municipalities, what their numbers are, see if ours are comparable or lower or higher, so there's potential there. For instance, our renewal fee is $25. We do not charge it for septics for renewals. So we could add that to the septics. One of our CEOs lives in a different county. He's building a house there. His renewal fee was the price of the permit again. So if it was a $450 permit over there, you pay it again. So there are different options. I just have not gotten that far.
One thing, if we look at the fee schedule, last time we discussed this was about assemblies, houses of worship, and it wasn't so much that, houses of worship shouldn't pay a fee, but if they do not, how do you then enforce it without violating the Constitution? That was the concern. So if you're looking at your fee schedule again and assemblies, and you're starting to approach churches again, just beware, there's a problem of enforcing action against a church, because if the church does not comply, do you close a church? You don't want to go there.
Churches still have to follow all of the requirements of the state codes. Set that out there.
Let me see you try to enforce against a church and close the church. I want to see you try to do that.
Dana Hogan?
I had two. Hey, that fire inspection question came up, John, with your predecessor. There was some discussion about charging the fee and making sure the appropriate expense was being applied with some appropriate revenue. So Chris, I thought we had looked into that and it was legal. We just never took the step to do it. And if I recall, we got a bizarre answer from John's predecessor as to why he didn't want to move forward in that. But
That was my recollection as well, Mr. Hogan, is that we can do it. I just hadn't had a chance to actually confirm that with Roger, but I thought we could do a local law and probably put a fee in there.
All right. And two, so hey, John, you had mentioned several municipalities. I think you mentioned the Village of Hudson Falls, Village of Fort Edward, and a couple others. Do they, and the town of Kingsbury we have our own code enforcement officer. My question is, do any of those communities, how many of them are code enforcement officers or actually licensed and can provide maybe an assistance in a short term if we needed to reach out to them in their own communities perhaps, or neighboring communities, just to provide some relief while we get caught up?
And that was a thought that I had about the scenario in Whitehall. Sorry, far away. That was a scenario that I had or thought of as far as Whitehall was considered. Todd in your area is code enforcement officer trained. Jim in Hudson Falls is. Jim Merriman in the town of Easton is. Actually, all five of them are full CEOs.
Well, so maybe, Chris, is this an area where we maybe, again, I know I heard you say earlier, I was listening to the YouTube version of the Public Works Committee where we said, I can't remember how you put it, but COVID has put a damper on our shared services approach. But is this an area where maybe we should be reaching out for some assistance in the short term, even if it's one day a week for these communities to provide assistance? I would be happy to ask the town of Kingsbury to see if Todd can maybe lend assistance for the short term while we get caught up. And I don't know if he can do fire inspections, perhaps maybe not building permits, because that does seem like it's got some area of specialization that I think would want to be retained at the county. But I got to believe the nuisance complaints and the violation complaints, those are the kind of things that can be addressed, I would think, by the other local CEOs.
Yes, in your area, yours is one of the, actually it might be the only one where you guys handle your own property maintenance complaints. The other areas, not talking about Hudson Falls, the ones that we don't currently cover, period. But the other towns and villages, we cover all of their property maintenance complaints. Their code compliance officers, there's a difference between them, but the code compliance officers generally only handle local laws. They do not handle property maintenance at our level for complaints. So
Was that something they could do for a short period of time?
I would be fine if they did it for a long period of time.
I understand. But the question, have you reached out to, has there been any discussion to go in that direction to see if we can get some short-term relief while things get caught up?
Since my tenure, no, I do not know what has happened previous.
We had a discussion this afternoon about that, and Chris, we talked about a per diem basis.
Yeah, so we did have a discussion somewhat along those lines, Mr. Hogan, not exactly, but in the same vein. And that was, John mentioned earlier that Jim Merriman is the Certified Code Enforcement Officer for the town of Easton. I believe John did reach out to him, and this was in response to, and again, Roger reminded me kindly of this, we have to have a conversation after this big conversation about what I'm about to say, about the emergency transfer of code enforcement from the town of Cambridge to the county. John did reach out to Jim Merriman and see if he might be interested in covering the town of Cambridge for us under some kind of part-time arrangement of part-time employment by the county to provide us some kind of relief in that vein. So your other suggestions, Mr. Hogan, I think we can look into those. I'll defer to John on doing that. But to Mr. Ward's point, one of the things we kind of have in the hopper, for lack of a better term, is that if the board wants us to explore it, we could conceivably hire Mr. Merriman part-time to cover the town of Cambridge to provide some relief to the department for that.
That would be to the point where the person that we hire or persons that we hire are trained, and then they can start doing their full responsibility. We're kind of talking two different things, emergency versus long-term solutions.
Further discussion? Then, I think the other thing is, when you get like this burnout, and we hate to have people burn out and quit, because then we get put in that cycle of you have to find a new person, you have to train them for 6 months, and that can happen quick when you're overworked. And I think that's part of the discussion I have with John. Is those guys are feeling a little overworked, and they probably are. And there's always the pressure to get things done. So I think that's a consideration too.
We have a phenomenal team over there, and I would hate to lose any of them.
So,
now one's retiring, John, you said. Is it possible? Is it possible to work towards backfilling that one person that's retiring?
That one, we've already gotten approval for backfilling. We've gotten 6 applications for that, and I have not even gotten a chance to sit down and set up interviews for those.
And Jim Merriman, and you have talked to him?
I asked him if he would be interested in possibly taking over the town of Cambridge. It would be under the county's umbrella. He said that was a possibility. But again, that my hopes would be that would be a short-term answer, not the long-term solution.
He would only do construction, or would he do fire and sanitary? And that
My
for the
initial
town?
thought is he'd do it all.
Yeah.
Dave?
So we're talking about possibly doing this as a part-time solution. Why wouldn't that be part of our long-term strategy? We get backed up, we could contract out like one of these code enforcement officers to help us out. Why wouldn't that be part of a long-term plan? It could be lesser cost than putting more additional people on. Not all, but just part.
I'm kind of a straight up guy, so I'll just say it. I think Chris might have just gotten sweat across his brow, I'm not sure. My fear is that I would get approval for a part-time person, and that full-time person or persons that I'm requesting would never happen.
I think the part-time solution is good to get us caught up in Cambridge and get us caught up on our backlog. But at some point, we're going to have to increase staff.
I didn't suggest not increasing staff. I suggested making 4 times when there's peaks to use some contract help versus full-time, versus having to hire another full-time employee. Especially with the situation in Whitehall, you have a spike here. If you get some part-time help up here to help out, that could be part of a long-term solution as well.
Yes. Matt?
Just like we get busy in the summer with DPW, and we hire summer help and temporary things for so many weeks. Let's put that in the staffing pattern now and address the long-term things in the budget.
So I think one of the issues with that, and that's what John was just alluding to, is that finding certified code enforcement officers that are available is very difficult.
Well, we have a pool to start with, right? The guy from Easton, the guy from Kingsbury.
Some of them are certified.
You may find the guy who's retiring.
Yeah, I'm getting
people who are part-time people who are certified that don't want a full-time job, that may say, no, I'll work 10 hours a week.
I'm getting different messages as to whether some of the local compliance officers are fully certified under the civil service realm. So we need to explore that. I think it's a good idea. We will have some conversations.
Yeah.
If we can, that's great. I by all means, I think we should pursue that. I just don't know if we can.
Yeah, I was only referring to the training. They're
Yep.
certified. Yeah, certified in that.
Dave?
So additionally, for example, we have one code enforcement officer retiring. Would he want to come back for part-time after that too? So, I mean, I know the answer to that, just different combinations. We do have a number of retired and not working here, who may be interested in picking up some extra hours.
I've asked that of him, and he's not interested, but.
So, do we have to move this to personnel?
What do we move it?
That's, your
That's Debbie's favorite motion after a half an hour of wide range.
It was, 1 fire inspector, additional, and 2 code enforcement.
officers.
And I will have to have a subsequent conversation with Melissa, because I don't, in a very quick review, I don't see fire inspector untitled by grade, so I don't know if that's just a code enforcement title that we put different duties on, or if it's actually a different civil service title, so we'll.
All 3 of them would be code enforcement officers, but.
It's a code enforcement officer with different duties.
Oh, okay, so then, as far as the way my mind works, it would be 3 code enforcement officers.
Yes.
Yeah, I was just spelling out the response.
Yeah,
Plus the backfill.
Backfill's already done.
So the motion would be for 3 code enforcement officers to go to personnel. Is that correct? Do I have a motion to move that forward?
Can I make a motion?
You can make an e-motion.
No
I'll make a motion.
Thank you, Sue. Do I have a second? Do I have a second for move the motion forward? Dana? Thank you. Matt?
2020 budget, where's the revenue coming from? Where's the budget, how are you gonna pay for it?
That's to be determined.
I think nobody support something with a to be determined on it?
Right, we're gonna have to look at that. But it's gotta come through personnel first before, right?
It's gotta go through a lot of steps, but.
Right.
Let's know what the hell we're talking about before we start moving down the steps.
Chris went through that number. Chris, you wanna give us it again?
Yes, for a full-time code enforcement officer, you're looking at a starting, salary of $65,000. So for 3 of them, you're at, $195,000.
And so where would that come out of the budget line?
What's that?
We're talking 1 quarter.
Oh, so for right now, that's gonna be
you wouldn't hire anybody for October. We're talking 1/4 of that. You're talking 50 grand at this point. So where's the 50 grand come from is the.
Okay, so you're talking 2020.
And that's how you build the
2021.
200 in next year.
I'm talking both. Yeah, you could scramble some numbers to get about 50 grand for 2020, but then you're locked in 200 grand for 2021.
Then you're locked in for.
I just have a real problem with this until we vet this much, much deeper, that's all. I'm not opposed to the idea, but.
Might be opposed to the number of them.
But where are you betting? You bet it in finance, right?
You got Dana Hogan.
Dana? Bet it somewhere.
If I'm hearing Matt correct, I agree with Matt. I don't know how you can move these 3 positions forward without understanding where this money's coming from, particularly in the era we're in right now. Folks, we're keep talking periodically about cutting in places, and now we continue to, we're adding 3 positions without vetting whether or not we can add revenue from fire inspections, whether or not we can seek assistance from other communities for the time being and in the short term. I can't vote to support adding 3 people right now.
Yeah, we have to vet those other things. We have to see if there's revenue, and we have to see if we can get part-time people. Those things all have to be vetted first.
We're getting back to, we still don't know the impact of what's gonna happen in the 2020 budget, not to say anything about the 2021 budget. I would be extremely hesitant to hire 3 positions and come to the budget and say, well, we have to lay those 3 people off, or we have to reach into other departments that are stressed out and lay people off from there too. So, you know, it's a problem. I know your problem, but we have other departments that may have some issues too. And how can we take one in consideration when pretty soon, as we go into the budget process, we're going to have a big concern about where the money's going to come to fund for the people we already have employed.
Bob?
But you still got, the department has an obligation to manage this department. So I think you ought to keep talking about it. Maybe you want to have him come and give the same presentation to finance. Maybe that'd be a way of handling it, instead of trying to, if you're reluctant to pass a motion supporting it at this point in time. Maybe present it before a larger forum, discuss it in that context.
With more information.
Yeah.
Let's find out if there's part-time people in the towns that can come out and help out. Let's find out, you know, those sort of things. What was the other question? There was one other one too.
Revenue from fire inspections.
Revenue from fire. Let's find out if those
Yeah,
things
I'm personally, you know,
are all positive.
rather behind him in this, because I know what the workload was and everything over there. But I think that, you know, you're right, we can't, I think you'll have trouble getting people supported without knowing how you're gonna pay for it.
You weren't the one they talked about with the wonky decision. He's not who you're referring to, right?
So,
He said the previous one, so it must have been.
You were referring to Bob, were you?
I forgot about the previous one.
John?
My point today was just to put everything out there as far as where our department stands and let you know what I think we need in order to complete the responsibilities that the state has given to us. I wasn't anticipating everybody saying, yes, you can have 3 people, you know, go on and get started. I just want everybody to be on the same page, because things aren't looking very positive over there. People's morale is dropping pretty quickly. These are emergency times here for our department. And if somebody else leaves, it's just going to get worse. These things are all things that should have been done in the past. But people made do with what they had, and now I'm asking to get what we need to not just make it by.
Could we, go ahead, Dave.
And we sympathize with you.
Yes, I understand.
And we understand that. It's just that this is an unusual time
I understand.
where a lot of people have been under a lot of stress over the past 9 months,
I understand.
8 months.
So I had wished that this would have been approached previously, and it was my plan to approach it previously. I was already thinking about it in January, and then everything happened. So that's why I'm coming at this point now. I couldn't do it before.
Dana Happ, did you have your hand up, Dana? Yes, John, going back to your presentation, did your presentation say that it's critical that you have a fire inspector now and you would like 2 others? If you had to prioritize, is the fire inspector critical? And if it is, would we be better off not hiring a specialized CEO, but one that can do all things rather than just a fire inspector CEO?
The terminology that I was using before, a fire inspector, without getting into all of the details on it, a fire inspector for the department that I'm leading as the administrator of it would be a full CEO. According to the state, you can have a fire inspector that only goes through half of the training. But I would like to have them go through all of the training to get to that level so that there is flexibility, so that that fire inspector wouldn't only be able to do fire inspections, they would also be able to do building inspections and such. So at this point, if it was a situation where I had one person that was approved, then I would, I guess, reevaluate where that person would have to be. Like I said, fire inspections are one of the first things to suffer.
Is the consensus to move this to finance for further vetting, to gather more information? Is that what we want to do with it?
Well, the chairman of finance can invite anybody into his committee to make.
Oh, it's fine with me, but your committee should decide what you want to do. I'm not on the committee here, I would move it, but I think it does need to be vetted before we go ahead.
Or maybe in your budget hearing, for your budget.
Because we have 2 avenues of bringing in per diem help now to handle some of the situation, and that's probably more immediate. And then the long-term solution of additional positions, I think we should.
Like I said, those things should be vetted somewhere, and the sooner the better. Finance is budget, right?
There's a motion to move them to personnel, yeah.
We had a motion to move it to personnel. Do we want to dismiss the motion, pull the motion back?
Did I get a second?
I think they said Mr. Half.
Yeah. So procedurally.
Even if personnel agrees, it still has to go to finance, doesn't it? It still has to go through finance one way or the other.
Right. You want to vet it all in personnel, is that what you're saying?
No, it's like 5 of us in personnel.
Do we want to withdraw the motion?
I get it.
Dave?
So, Zoom, since the discussion go to finance, I would amend that to discussion, take this to finance to vet this forward.
Okay. We have a motion to vet it in finance. Do I have a second? Change it.
We amending the other.
We amended.
Right, we amending the other motion?
In essence, you're amending the
We amended,
motion, but the procedure's the same. You need a second on that amendment to change it from personnel to finance. Then you vote on that, and then you vote on the amended resolution. So you still, what you need now is a second to the amendment, right?
Okay.
And that's.
I'll be the original second.
Okay.
All right, so now that we've changed it to go to finance, is there further discussion on moving it to finance, or do you just want to vote on moving it?
Yeah, there's further discussion. Because now personnel is before finance. So is it a joint personnel and finance, or does this wait until October to go to personnel? Because I don't care which way. I'm just making sure everybody knows all those avenues before we get down that route.
Isn't the bottom line, you're okay with doing it if you can pay for it?
Well, right, but I'm just saying that if they decide they want to do something, I don't know.
We're talking about 3 full-time people, or are we talking about some temporary part-time people?
It could be any, either, or both. Or neither. Until we vet it, you can't do it.
Blank check, I'm gonna vote yes to move a blank check.
No, you're not gonna do that in personnel. That's why I'm asking.
No, today, right now.
No, today we're just moving it to finance to vet. My question then is, are you going to have a joint personnel if this is of the essence, or we just move it to October. And I don't care which, but John might care which. That's my question.
Sue?
You know, I'm a little concerned, okay? John has kind of laid out exactly what his department needs and how he's gonna make that department operate and try to keep this county going in a direction that we want to do it. And we're talking about sending it to personnel or sending it to finance. He's still sitting in the chair trying to figure out how he's gonna run his department. And quite frankly, I think that we should be able to come to some agreement so that he knows what he's supposed to be doing. And right now, we've got our real estate sales are through the roof. That wasn't even on his list of things that is going to be happening, because every single town, some of the properties staying on there less than 36 hours. And you know, the first thing they're going to do is redo the kitchen. They're going to do the outside of the house, and they're going to redo the whole house. And they're going to be calling John to get a building permit. So I think as a county, the Board of Supervisors, we need to give him some direction as to how he handles his department. So even though this discussion I know is about money, and we need to think about money, you also need to think about how we operate. So John, are you going to work 80 hours a week? Is that the plan, or how are we going to do this? I don't know. It just floors me to have this conversation when he said very clearly that he needs help. So I think we should send it on to finance and talk about it some more, and maybe have some actual figures and see what we can do to support what needs to be done and do it in a way that the budget is accommodating. So I don't know where the motion is at, but is it still at going to finance?
Yeah, we're in agreement there, Sue. My question was how quick, because personnel meets before finance, so it won't be discussed there. It'll be discussed in finance. So how prudent do we need to be? Can we wait till October for it to go back to personnel?
Can we schedule a personnel meeting immediately following finance?
That was my question.
Yes, yep.
Done, then that's not an issue.
Okay, that's all I wanted to know.
Okay, so we have, Roger, we have an amended.
You have a motion now to move it to finance.
Yes.
Ready to vote on after further discussion.
Any further discussion? All in favor of moving it to finance?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed?
Aye.
What's next after
All
that?
right, no, now it goes to finance.
Okay, good.
No, that was the amendment.
Oh, that was the amendment, I'm sorry, yeah, so now you have to vote to actually.
Even the parliamentarian.
Right, well, yeah.
So,
Now we have to vote what?
Now you're voting.
You voted to.
I'm moving it to finance.
From personnel to finance, now it's time to actually do it. That was
Move it to finance.
That was the vote on the amendment, now you have to vote on the amended motion, which is to move it to finance.
Am I
okay.
the only one that's?
That's what you didn't want.
No, you're not.
Remember?
I'm the guy who does this, and I'm.
Well, the first motion was to bring it to personnel.
Right.
And then
So they amended it instead of
finance,
just
so-
doing it, so, yeah.
So now,
So the new motion is to move to finance, so we just vote to move to finance?
now we
Vote to
amended.
amend it from
The personnel to
Finance.
finance.
Now we're going to finance. So,
You tried to avoid that, I know you did.
do I have a motion to,
No, you just need,
All you gotta do is vote.
just need to vote on the motion.
okay,
Vote on the original motion.
a vote on the original motion to move it to finance? Any
If it ends,
discussion?
I'll vote yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, all in favor?
That's the way to get what you want. You just turn them around in circles.
Opposed?
Something to do in Albany?
Okay, so we're going to finance with that issue.
As you know, the stock market went up 100 points based on this.
Any other?
I think I've done enough.
No, you haven't, actually.
Okay.
So, you first talked about Cambridge. Cambridge right now, we're operating Cambridge's, code enforcement on their behalf pursuant to a resolution from 2009 that allows the chairman, with the consent of the Public Safety Committee, to engage in a 90-day emergency, code enforcement situation. That's what we're operating under now. That can be extended if it's approved by the Finance Committee, extended by the chairman for an additional 90 days. We're about 30 some odd days into the 90 days at this point.
30-ish.
in order to permanently take over the code enforcement operations for any municipal subdivision of ours, that municipality has to adopt before July a resolution stating they're getting out of the business on January 1st of the next year. Cambridge has not done that. They missed the deadline. So the best they could do under the statute is adopt a resolution before July of 2021 to have us start January of 2022. Unless, as we have done in the past with, like,
Putnam was the last one.
Putnam, I think it was, right? Chris reminded me. We waive that requirement, we waive that waiting period, and assume it whenever you want to, okay? That's a waivable thing. So we could hold them to it, and we could say, nope, not until January of 2022. Because the point of the statute is to give the county enough time to prepare between July and when it's going to start. So what we need from this committee today is ratification of the emergency agreement, which will go for 90 days from the end of, I think it's the end of July, with the possibility of an extension for another 3 months. And if you're so inclined, a resolution from the full board assuming Cambridge's code enforcement function before January of 2022.
Who's doing it right now?
We are.
So we've already done it.
Well, pursuant to that agreement, which needs to be ratified. If it's not ratified, that's what the resolution says. The chairman can enter into agreements, but that agreement is subject to ratification by the Public Safety Committee. Here we are. So if the Public Safety Committee doesn't ratify it, kind of like a treaty, then John is done. That's the first issue. The second issue is that's a temporary fix, and we've used it in other cases where somebody came down sick, came down with a disease, got hit by a bus, whatever, you know, where we thought there was going to be an end to it. That's why it's only good for basically 180 days before we have to sign a new agreement, which would again be subject to ratification. But we're talking about the long-term solution. We're talking as if the Cambridge thing has happened, and procedurally it has not happened yet.
If we don't pass those two motions or one of those two motions, then basically Cambridge has no code enforcement and nothing can ever get done there.
Right. Or they have to get back into business. And this is not, I'm bringing it up for the first time only because I actually don't think I was at the last public safety meeting. I think I missed it. So that needs to be done just to get the procedure. We're acting as if it's happened. We just need to, if that's what we want to do, we need to make it happen.
So we ratify it for 180 days?
Well, all you have to do is ratify the chairman signing the emergency agreement because Cassie lost her person immediately or whatever.
I'll move that. Well, Roger, just that ratification.
Do I have a second?
I'll second it.
Any discussion
Maybe you should turn it down. Because help him out.
on it? Sue?
How do we know the town of Cambridge is not looking for their own?
I was told by Kathy.
Right. From my understanding, they're looking to get out of the business.
Yes, the town of Cambridge has indicated they would like the county to take over for them.
So we have something from their town board saying that they don't want to do that anymore?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Any other discussion? All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
So the second issue on the table is Cambridge has come to us after the July deadline to say we would like to get out of the code enforcement business forever, which they can do, but in order for it to happen at the beginning of a new year, it has to be passed prior to the July before that. That didn't happen, July 1st, I think it is.
Yes.
So they missed the deadline, so we could hold them to that deadline, which means the next time they could act was before July of 2021, to then assume it starting July 2022. January, I'm sorry, 2022. There is precedent for us having assumed it mid-cycle, for lack of a better term, to something very similar. I think the timing was very similar to this. because it happened
It was
after
about
July.
that.
Right, so we would put a resolution in front of the full board saying, we know we have this right to say no and make them wait till 2022, but we're waiving that right and we'll assume it because our 90 days will get us through the end of the year, and assume it effective at, well, the end of the 90 days might be a little short.
Yeah, a little short.
Effective whenever the end of that 90 days was.
You understand that waiving motion?
What's that?
Make sure Debbie understands the waiving motion.
All right, so the board, in it, we're,
What up, Sylvia?
all right, so we're agreeing to Cambridge's request for us to assume code enforcement duties effective, and I'll get Debbie the date, effective at the end of the emergency agreement. And waiving our right to request have the request by July 1st.
I'll make that waiving.
Motion, okay.
I'll make the waiving.
Do I have a second? Do I have any wavy discussion?
I better wait too long.
I have no more waves? All in favor?
I saw the pass, yeah.
I have
Any-
discussion.
Go ahead, Dana.
Earlier, it was said that the Easton code enforcement officer may work part-time for the county to do Cambridge. Couldn't Cambridge enter into discussion with the Easton enforcement officer to do Cambridge and eliminate the middleman, Washington County?
They certainly could if they so desired. And I feel bad Kathy's not here,
Yeah, me too.
but, they could. If we say no, they'll have to.
But they so not desired was what we
Right,
heard.
they wanted to permanently absolve themselves of that responsibility, which they can do. It's just they missed that date.
Well, they can do it for a year. They could do that for a year, right?
Yeah,
Well, I don't know if the guy would agree to that for, I don't know.
We don't know.
could be
We
the
don't-
opportunity.
Yeah.
It is a possibility, yes, Mr. Happ.
It was my
And in order to see if that's possible, you have to vote no.
Well, today is going to be one step in a two-step process to get it in front of the board. And Cassie can put it in front of the board herself, if, you know, through the system of any supervisor can sponsor a resolution.
John?
It was just my understanding from Supervisor Fedler that had gone to the board, the town board, as an option. And they decided they did not want to pursue that. They just wanted to give it to the county.
So they decided not to pursue an agreement with Easton?
But they did not have the knowledge that we may not say yes.
I explained the situation to Kathy about how it works, and she understands that that's a possibility.
Any further discussion?
Or I hope she does, after I explained it to her.
Any further,
Because I talked to her.
further discussion? All in favor? Aye. Opposed?
Nay.
Mr. Happ?
Hartford, nay.
Yes, he's a no, but no, it passes.
Okay,
He's the only no.
it passes. Any other code enforcement issues? Are we done?
All set.
We done? Okay. Sheriff Murphy, thanks for the long wait.
Okay. Good evening. Yes, I would like to request a resolution to adopt the contracts with the schools that we sent over to be signed by the chairman of the board for the school resource officers, the special patrol officers. Basically renewing the contract in place.
I'll move it.
Second?
Second.
Any discussion on school resource officer contracts? All in favor? Any,
One question.
Brian?
Sheriff, how does this work, like with Whitehall being shut down?
Yeah, we're not sure yet. We don't have a definitive answer on that. But we'll know as soon as they know, I think, how long they're gonna be
But the
shut.
way the contract's written, would you be paying them if there was nobody going to school? I assume not.
No, not if the school's not paying them, you know, then if we're not paying them, the school's not paying them, vice versa, so.
Well, I mean, the schools are gonna pay them if they don't need them to be in the class, right? I'm just trying
No,
to.
I don't think
Okay.
they'll be using them until there's gonna be students in the school.
Okay.
Unless they decide that they, you know, during the restoration process, they need somebody there or whatever, but I haven't heard that from the school.
Any further discussion? Oh, Sue? Go ahead.
Sheriff Murphy, if, say, October 1st, that we go back into a part where the schools all shut down, will the county be responsible for payroll for these school resource officers not going to work?
No, that happened this year, so.
Yeah. How did that occur? What happened?
Some schools use the special patrol officers to help them with the meals and stuff that they did for the kids and whatnot. Not all the schools, but basically if they don't work for the school, then they don't get paid and then we don't get reimbursed. So it's just, some schools used them and some schools didn't.
Okay, so it was up to each school district to determine how they were going to use them or not use them?
Yes.
Okay,
It's a
thank you, Chris.
pass-through.
Thank you, Sheriff Murphy.
So did you hear what Roger said?
It's a pass-through cost, so they pay us, we use that money to pay the officers. So if the officer doesn't work, there's no payment, the officer doesn't get paid. That's why they're in a separate title like that.
With that. Anything else, Sheriff Murphy?
Getting out no what?
Al? Go ahead,
If my memory is correct, which it isn't always, but I think that this has to go to finance too, because I think at least one of the rates is changing and that rate is set in our, through finance and the grade schedule. Two of them? Okay. So it'll be to adopt the contracts and we'll need a rate schedule change too.
That's what the motion was, right?
Thanks.
We need additional motion then, or?
Nope, just aye.
Was Sheriff Murphy, was there a discussion about vehicles? In,
Yeah.
We might
I got an email that there was.
vote on that last motion.
Do we need to vote on that?
Yeah.
Yeah. We need to pass that motion though first time.
Oh. Excuse me. No further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Yes, thank you. You got an email from DPW, Sheriff Murphy?
Well, no, just from Deb, just let me know that there may be discussion about vehicles during this meeting.
And go ahead.
So as a recap for anybody who wasn't in our morning meeting, the issue came up that in carpool, in the adopted 2020 carpool budget, we had budgeted for 5 new cruisers for the sheriff for roughly $175,000 cost. Once COVID hit, all the department heads, and the budget officer has talked to you about this before, all the department heads were really good about reining in spending. The sheriff actually volunteered. He reached out to me and said, look, I know we're in a tough spot. We could probably do without the 5 new cruisers this year. We spoke to Deb and the carpool staff. They agreed that we could probably extend the life of some of our current cruisers a little bit further. This morning in Public Works, there was discussion about that unspent money, and there was some concern from the board that maybe we should have bought those cruisers anyway. So I think Sheriff, the committee didn't want to go ahead and take any action without your input. So, originally we had 5, then after COVID and we were trying to control costs, we did 0. And then I think the concern from the board today was, are we putting ourselves further behind by doing that? And so I think the Public Safety Committee is looking for your input on that.
And did they say 2 this morning? Was that where it came here? Was 2?
That was discussed.
That's what I think was discussed.
So I took a look real quick after I got the email, and the current system works great, and that's why we stick around the 5 number. because of the mileage, the way the mileage works. So I looked and I have 7 that are in the high 70s or 80,000 mile range, one that's in the 90,000 mile range. They put on 3,000 or 4,000 miles a month. So by the end of the year, we would have 5 or 6 or maybe 7 that are over 100,000, which is kind of the pitch count for us, So anything would be good, I'd be appreciative if it was 2. That'd be 2 less that aren't going to reach that 100,000 mile or over mark. So that's just to give you an idea of where we're at fleet-wise with the numbers.
Brian?
So, Sheriff, looking at it that way, if you got 7 in that caliber, then if we turned right around in the new budget with 5, we would be pretty much back where we need to be going into the following year?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, we have 4 months left in this year, and that'll those cars will be in the 100,000 mile range. The only problem is we order them next year. They usually take 4 months, 5 months maybe to come in, depending upon where Ford's at with their production. So we've had them take as long as 7 or 8 months to come in. So that's another consideration as well.
Oh, so getting 2 started would probably be good then.
Yeah, I think so.
Matt?
Well, actually, Al has his hand up first. I'll take Mr.
Al,
Al.
Al, you're camouflaged.
Okay, go ahead, Mr. Hicks.
Well, after discussion this morning, I went back, looked at the budget, talked to Chris, talked to Al, and the numbers lay out so that we did budget around, you said around $175,000 for vehicles. If we didn't buy any vehicles, it would appear, based upon a projection, that we'd end up with a fund balance of around $600,000 in carpool. Based upon the fund balance policy that I thought we'd adopted, maybe we didn't, but Chris gave us a set of guidelines on each fund, and that fund had a guideline of around $500,000. So if we did buy 2 cars, we would still end up somewhere in the neighborhood of the fund balance that you suggested. And that fund would be healthy. We would have 2 cars to move forward. If we could bite the bullet and do that, we would not get us too far out of whack. That's just some parameters to think about.
And if it's 7 or 8 months are right, if you ordered the 5 in January, they wouldn't be here till now, next year, the second wave. So that.
Yeah, I don't know where we are in lead time. The last 2 years, lead time on vehicles has been atrocious. I mean,
It's gotta be worse now.
9 months or so. So we haven't bought any vehicles lately, so I don't know.
We get them tomorrow.
Al?
So yeah, I apologize, Sheriff. I'm the one that kind of stuck my nose in this morning, but my 2 concerns were this. Number one, we've all seen the cost of kicking the can before. And if we put these cars off for 2 or 3 years, they're not going to be any cheaper then, is one of my concerns. And my secondary concern was this program that we have in place seems to be working really good, where the sheriff cars then get donated down into the pool, and then we replenish the sheriff cars. My secondary fear this morning was if we don't buy at least 2 and we have a year where we buy 0, none of those cars will be donated, and then Deb will come back to committee. Deb will need cars because she didn't get the donations, and we'll be trying to catch you up. So 3 to 5 years, we'll be looking for 9 cars instead of the 5 that were scheduled. So I had 2 different fears if we did nothing. So I thought at least 2 would lighten the future burden a little bit.
No, I certainly would. And that's like I said, if you look at how many miles they have on them now and you project out, 3 to 4,000 miles a month for those 7 cars, by the time they were turned in, they'd have quite a bit of miles on them.
Right.
So yeah, 2 would be better than nothing. And it obviously would help us, like you said, to have cars that turn into carpool.
Dana Hogan?
I make a motion, we buy 2 or move forward to purchase 2 vehicles.
Do we have a second? Further discussion?
Even though it's in the budget, does it need to go to finance?
Actually, I was just saying yes and then no.
No.
We budgeted for 5. Budget's there, money to make any structural changes to the budget.
Great, we just moved some money out, but not enough to offset 2 cars.
You're fine.
So we don't have to move to finance.
You can just approve it.
Brian just got to sign it and make it so.
Do we have to, do we have a motion?
Get a motion to buy the car,
To buy the
so
car.
that's fine.
Okay. So, further discussion? All in favor to purchase 2 vehicles? Aye. Opposed? Done. Sheriff, any other items?
Yeah, real quick, I met this morning with the chairman of the board and the chairman of public safety, just to let them know where we're at with the governor's executive order. And I just wanted to update the committee. We've started the process. As you know, I had to have the budget in today, so that takes up most of my time at the end of this month annually. So now that that's done, we're committed to getting that in place. We have done some things to comply with the executive order, which is in the realm of training. We did anti-racial bias training over the last month, and also de-escalation training over the last month to get ahead of this plan. And then what we're going to do prior to the next public safety meeting is to look at forming a committee of stakeholders that are included in the language of the order, which are the district attorney, public defender. I'd like to have alternative sentencing on board, probably social services, and then members of business and clergy, things like that. And my plan is to send out a survey to community or county residents to get some results back on their thoughts on policing and what we can do better as an agency in their mind. And then the other obligation will be to have a public hearing after we get the input from the community, and then give them another opportunity at the public hearing to be heard as far as what they think about the executive order and what they think about the sheriff's office in general. And that will satisfy the requirements within the executive order as far as public input. As I've stated before, fortunately, we're an accredited agency. This isn't really a heavy lift for us. In fact, we're going to use this as an opportunity to showcase all the things we do for people in the county. So within the next couple of months, we'd like to get this done and wrapped up, and then submit it to the state so that it won't affect any of our state funding that we get. And as the governor had noted in his order, the plan has to be in by April 21st. It doesn't require any approval by the state. You just have to have a plan in place and submitted prior to April 21st. So I'd like to do it before the end of this year, within the next couple months. So basically, just wanted to update the board that we're working on that. Now that I have the budget done, we can concentrate on the executive order and get all those pieces in place.
Thank you, Sheriff. Any questions for Sheriff Murphy? Thank you. Sue?
Don, I just wanted to thank Sheriff Murphy for taking the initiative with the de-escalation in the anti-racial, to already get that accomplished. You got a lot accomplished in a short amount of time. And so I thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Any other questions? Sheriff Murphy? Any other business? Do we have a motion to, other business or adjourn? Did you jump the gun?
Adjourn.
Motion to adjourn, second. Someone's got a second. Okay, we are adjourned.
Best news in 3 hours.